Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian Smith. I'm back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and today I've got with me my good friend Roberta Grimes, and this is crazy. This is full circle. Roberta is one of the first podcasts I started listening to after my daughter Shayna passed away 5.5 years ago. We became friends after that, and I finally got Roberta on Grief to Growth. I'm going to read her introduction, and then we'll just have a conversation like we always do. Roberta had two experiences of light in childhood that prompted her to spend decades studying nearly 200 years of abundant and consistent afterlife evidence. Eventually, she figured out what her experiences of life had been, and beyond that, she learned so many details about what happens at and after death that in 2010, she published The Fun of Dying, Find Out What Really Happens Next. Her 2014 sequel was The Fun of Staying in Touch, and that subtitle, How Our Loved Ones Contact Us and How We Can Contact Them. After which, in 2015, came Liberating Jesus. Her 2016 book was The Fun of Growing Forever. We can't transform the world until we can transform ourselves. And it demonstrates how well the gospel teachings of Jesus work to help us develop spiritually. Then in 2017, she published The Fun of Living Together. We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools, which explains how we can heal our racial problems in one generation. Roberta is a graduate of Smith College and Boston University School of Law. She does a weekly radio program and podcast called Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes, which is what I mentioned up at the top. And that's on webtalkradio.net and many other venues. And Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. So Roberta is an extremely busy and energetic person. And I want to welcome Roberta to Grief to Growth.
Hi, dear. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, it's really wild having you on. As I said in the intro, I mean, we were talking before we got on. It was either you or Sandra Champlain. I discovered you guys about the same time. My daughter passed away in June of 2015, and I wasn't really even listening to podcasts at the time. And something prompted me to start listening to podcasts, and I found your podcast, and it really helped me so much that those first several years that I got to thank you for doing what you do.
It's my joy. You have no idea how much I love doing this. Um, I hope I live to be 90, so I get to do it for a whole long time.
Yeah.
Really.
So I know I always feel like when I have people like you on, that everybody knows your story, but not everybody does. So you did have a couple of experiences of light, as you call them, when you were younger. So tell me about those and how that kind of transformed you into what you are now.
Nowadays, they're called spiritually transformative experiences. And I understand now what happened to me, but at the time it was a mystery. When I was 8 years old, I really literally was only 8 years old, and a good little Christian child, I woke up in the middle of one night and I knew there was no God. And I was terrified. And in the midst of my fear, there was a bright light in the room, like burning magnesium, that bright. And it was a flash of light. It's because it's like still present in my mind. And this is a million years later. I remember what that room looked like. Otherwise, I would have no memory of it.
Mm-hmm.
There was a voice at the same time that said, "You wouldn't know what it is to have me if you didn't know what it is to be without me. I will never leave you again." Now, when you're 8, everything surprises you. So nothing surprises you. So I thought, oh, isn't that handy? If you forget there's a God, they'll remind you. And I went back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was like one of those, when you're a kid, you're learning stuff. I thought eventually I would learn it, what had happened to me in Sunday school, in regular school.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to college and majored in religion, at some point, someone would say, and if you forget there's a God, this is what they do. But of course, it never happened. So I said at 20, I was getting really kind of depressed. I mean, what do you do with a religion degree if you don't even want to be a nun or anything? It's kind of useless.
Mm-hmm.
So I came home one day in the summer when I turned 20 and sat down on my bed, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, bright as day. And over my right shoulder, splashing in the room, was the same white light. And this time it had beautiful music with it, like tiny bells, only beautiful. And the same voice said, "I will never leave you." So that's when I knew the first one had, of course, happened. It wasn't, a crazy child's imagination. So I have spent the rest of my life since I was 20 trying to understand that experience, and it's led me to here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't have that experience when I was a little kid in Sunday school, and I wondered the same thing. But it's interesting how some of us get those experiences and some of us don't. But I think we kind of get what we need to prompt us
You can't
along the
always
way.
get what you want, but you get what you need. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you majored in religious studies, and I think it was partly because you wanted to figure out this thing about the light, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I figured, somebody is going to finally say, or I'd become close enough to some professor that I could ask the question. But I never asked the question, and I never got an answer. And instead, I got that experience when I was 20. And then I knew I wasn't supposed to talk about it with other people, so I didn't.
Yeah.
Not until I was in my 40s did I ever mention it to anyone.
So you went
that was because my mother had a similar experience when my father was dying.
Oh,
so I knew other people can have that experience too.
Oh, I didn't know about that. Tell me about that.
These are not always poetic experiences, but they're profound for the person. When my father was dying, my mother was in her 70s. He was 14 years older, and she was staying up with him and all kinds of things. And she went back someone else was with him while he was dying, and she went back to her bedroom to sleep a little bit, sat down in her bed and, was reading a book. And she had the same thing happen, bright experience. And a voice said, "I'm giving you a few more days with him so you can get a few things straight." Now, that's not poetic.
Right.
What does it mean? I mean, it means nothing. But the key thing is she didn't know about my experience. And when I was driving, I would drive almost 2 hours each way to be with him every day while this was happening. And because I had family at home. And I called her and said, "Hi, Mom. How's he doing?" We knew he was dying. And she said, "Oh, I can't tell you. Something wonderful happened. I can't tell you. I can't tell you." So I said, "You saw a light, didn't you?" She said, "How did you know that?" And then I said, and some voice said, "How did you know about that?"
Wow.
So when I got to her kitchen, I told her what had happened to me first time. And the same thing had happened to her. It's a light and a voice out of the light. And that's the way it's pretty profound though. She totally lost her mind before she died. She died in her 90s. And when she could no longer recognize her children, she still remembered that experience, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. So you went to law school, you became a lawyer, and I know you were raised this religious background. So at what point did you start to integrate these experiences you had with your religion, or start seeking what you started seeking?
I didn't. I kept them completely separate because it didn't seem to be religious what had happened to me. It seemed to be more like what happens in your life. You don't think of everything. Going to the dentist isn't religious. But I was more and more, the research I was doing, because I was doing a tremendous amount of research right from my 20s on, more and more the research was bumping up against my religion. And I was very serious about my religion.
Right.
Because I have read the Bible through, I tell people 6 times, probably it's close to 7 or 8, 10, 12 times, because I started doing it when I was 12 and I did it every year over and over again until I was early 50s. So that's a lot of times to read the Bible. And so I was very familiar with the Bible, and I was because I had majored in early Christian history, I was very familiar with the history of Christianity. And I kept expecting the magical moment when what they say about what happens at and after death would converge, right? You expect it.
Right.
Because I believed them both. And then there came a moment in my early 50s when I had to give it up. I realized the dead keep telling us there's no religion in the afterlife. The death of Jesus on the cross has never made a bit of difference for a single human being. And that's clear. I was learning how very important Jesus is, much more important, I think, than people realize. And learning it from people who are dead. I mean, the dead know what's going on a lot more than we do. And at the same time, I was learning that my religion was wrong. And so I had a real crisis of faith. I closed my Bible, stopped reading it. I stopped doing afterlife research. I was a Catholic by then because I had married a Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't do anything with it for 2 years. I literally, because I knew there was no hell, but can you go to hell for discovering that there is no hell?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a horrible problem for someone who sincerely believed that stuff.
Yeah.
But about 2 years later, there was a rainy day, and I was trying to get my courage up, and I finally did. And I opened my Bible. I was very familiar with the Gospels. I'd read them so many times.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking, Jesus said some of this stuff. I think it's near what he said, but I couldn't bear to have him be wrong. I couldn't bear to find anything he had screwed up,
Yeah.
or, that I was screwing up that he had said differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered, it was the greatest day of my life. I discovered that Jesus actually knew 2,000 years ago, all the stuff that we could not have possibly confirmed until at least the early 20th century. Little things and big things, all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
He had been there. He really knew. I can prove to you, Jesus is real. So I thought that was pretty exciting. And but that's when I realized I had to choose either Jesus or Christianity. I could not choose both.
Yeah.
So I chose Jesus.
That is a hard and scary thing. I know what you went through, because I went through a similar thing. I was probably in my 30s or 40s, and my grandfather was a pastor. I was raised in the church. I'd read the Bible.
Lord, that's worse.
And and the Sunday school indoctrination and all that stuff. And I actually kind of stepped out of it. I first found something called Christian Universalism, and I studied that, and it basically said that that no one is eternally damned. There is no hell. That Jesus actually saves everyone. And then you get people saying, well, you're going to hell because you don't believe in hell anymore. And you're telling people there's no hell, so therefore you're going to go to hell. Or they'll say to you, well, if you just studied a little bit more. I have a really good friend who's still an evangelical, and said, Brian, just read the Bible a little bit more and pray and ask God to open up your eyes. And I'm like, I've been doing this for 50 years. So I know what you mean when you say, you get to the point where it just doesn't make any sense anymore.
And the deeper you go in the Gospels, the more you find that Jesus did have a reason. The more you find Jesus is divine.
Mm-hmm.
He came from the highest aspect of the Godhead. He's even bigger than God's Son. He is God himself. God walked the earth 2,000 years ago in the person of Jesus to observe us and to teach us. And if you actually sit down and uncritically read the Gospels apart from the rest of the Bible, you find out why he came and what he taught. And all of that, it's all still there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a miracle by itself, because a lot of what he said is not palatable for Christians to know. And so they just ignore it. I mean, if you're a Christian, you go to church, they read the parts that they agree with, and they ignore the rest. Yeah. But if you honestly read the whole thing, and what's even worse is, of course, that the Council of Nicaea and 8 other first millennium councils changed the Gospels. Fortunately, they didn't change them a lot, but that's how much they respected Jesus. Mm-hmm. They removed every reference they could find to reincarnation, and even said they did that. They thought it wasn't right for there to be more than one life. They wanted people to really try hard in this one life. Right. But who are they to say that? Right. And they also added some things. They added things about church building. Jesus never built a church or talked about it. They added things about end times and Armageddon. All of that he didn't say. Sheep and goats, some people are damned, some are not. That's Calvinism. That's way after Jesus. Mm-hmm. A whole bunch of things they added. But it's easy when you understand what he did say, and you to find the inconsistencies and to pull them out. So it's not that hard to create a gospel which is probably very close to what he actually said.
Yeah, and I love what you said there. And it's interesting because so many people that do religious studies, so many people that go to seminary, et cetera, actually end up becoming atheists. They will they'll stand in the pulpit and they'll preach every week, but they don't believe a word that they're saying because they realize what they're saying doesn't make any sense.
No, that's the problem. No human-made God makes sense. There have been a lot of human-made gods. It's a fundamental human need to have a God, and probably because otherwise, we're alone at least if there's a God, even if the God's angry, at least there's a way to kind of make your peace with reality. For example, I'll contrast two gods that I've just been writing about this week. Moloch, which was the Canaanite god, the great Canaanite god that they were fighting, the Jews were fighting as they came into the area of Jerusalem. That god had cow horns on his head, big horns, and a fire in his belly, and they fed him their babies.
Yeah.
That's how they made peace with that God. Now, you or I think that's ridiculous right on its face. But the primitive people didn't think it was ridiculous. They thought it was a way to appease what they otherwise could not even begin to understand, never mind appease. But there isn't that much difference between Moloch and the God of the Christians when you think about it. Because we say God's all love and all this stuff, but Christians actually believe that their God enjoys watching his child be horribly murdered, because otherwise he won't forgive us for our human failings. He won't forgive us even for being descended from Adam.
Yeah.
Think about that. All right, you've got 6 children. They're all babies right now, and they're all messing up the living room, and you are really angry. So you try to ask yourself, which of those 6 babies that I love more than life would I most enjoy being horribly murdered so I can forgive the rest?
Yeah.
That made sense to people who still didn't know much of anything 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. But it makes no sense now.
Right.
Because if that is what God is really like, then God is not loving. Jesus says we have to forgive no matter what, 1,000 times, it doesn't matter. And yet God can't even forgive us for the fact that we're fallible?
Yeah, for being what we were made to be.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
It makes no sense. And that's why your friends are falling away from the religion, because people are more sophisticated now than we've ever been in human history, and less and less and less of the religions, all of them, make sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we start to figure those things out, and some of us did even as a small child, I'm like, why would God punish Jesus like that? And frankly, I hated God when I was a kid. I feared God, literally. But I love Jesus. Yeah. I love Jesus because Jesus at least came between me and this guy that wanted to kill me just for being born.
Yes.
Yeah.
The thing is, popularity contests in the world, Jesus is always the number 1 or number 2. Not everybody loves Jesus, and they should.
Yes.
Jesus was God on earth. Jesus came to help us escape from the fears that all religions are based in fear, because they're all made by people, and they're made by people who are trying to control other people. And how do you control people? With fear. I mean, people aren't going to get out of bed and go and sit in the pews and put money in the plate unless they're scared. Why else would they do it?
Right.
And so every religion is based in fear. And the problem with that is that it's impossible to grow spiritually while you're afraid. So Christianity, as it is practiced, actually makes it much harder for us to grow spiritually. And we come here to grow spiritually. So what's the point of that?
Yeah, I agree with you. And as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about someone who just had a major loss in their life, a loss of a child. And this person is a Christian. They're just really, and we suffered. And think about, and I saw a guy wrote a book once, basically compare Christianity to a cult. And I hesitate to say that, but it's true, because one of the things a cult does is it indoctrinates you against anybody outside. It tells you they're going to come and tell you this. And when they do, it's a lie. And if you fall away, then you're condemned, you're out. So it doesn't allow us to explore. And it doesn't allow us to really so when we get to the point like you and I did with this crisis of faith, we're scared. We're like stepping off of a cliff.
It was a terrible experience. But what I found was, if you say, okay, Jesus, I'm following you and I'm not going to follow anyone else. Please show me. What I did was eventually I gave my life to Jesus. And I did it with an affirmation prayer. A gratitude affirmation prayer is the highest, most powerful kind. I just said, thank you for giving me work to do. Thank you for showing me how to do it. And every day for the past, 12 or 15 years, I have prayed that prayer,
Mm-hmm.
usually a couple times a day.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you really have to do. I'm here, use me. And God, and Jesus has never said you're doing the wrong thing. You know, when The Fun of Dying was about to be published, this was in summer of 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I went through another crisis there because it really is pretty blunt about a lot of things
It
and
is.
what's true and what's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got down on my knees, believe it or not, Brian, you think I'm going to think I'm crazy? I got down on my knees one day that summer. Actually, I think it was just before I went to bed. And I said, I'm trying to do what you want me to do. If there's anything in that book that you don't want to have see daylight, I have told my publisher that if I die this week, this month, before it comes out in the fall, don't publish it. And please take me rather than letting me do something wrong. And I meant it with all my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up the next morning and I was sort of a little surprised.
Yeah.
And I got all this wonderful affirmation. I got all kinds of things. Okay, this is what God wants me to do. We'll see where it goes, but I'll take it this far. Another thing, The Fun of Dying is kind of an unusual name. I wanted to call it Dying for Idiots because I knew Dying for Dummies would be taken, and so and my publisher said, no, you need a different name. That's not a good name. So I went to bed one night and I first said, okay, God, if you have a title in mind, will you please give it to me? And I woke up with 3 titles: The Fun of Dying, The Fun of Staying in Touch, and The Fun of Growing Forever. And I thought, oh, that's way better than Dying for Idiots. And so did my publisher, but I didn't know what the other 2 were about. I figured staying in touch would be about signs, and it was, but I didn't start writing it for several years. I didn't know what Growing Forever was about. But then, as I began to realize the whole point of this is learning how you grow spiritually, and that Jesus gave us the easiest method for rapid spiritual growth, now we have Growing Forever too.
Yeah. And
so I didn't make up the titles.
Yeah. And for people,
if God gives you the titles, I'm pretty sure he probably wants you to write the book.
Yeah, you probably want to go with those. And I got to say, I've known you now for several years, and I love your sincerity. I love the way you're frank with stuff. As you said, there are some things in the book they're gonna offend some people, but people need to be kind of woken up. And we're in good company because Jesus offended a lot of people. So I tell people when they say you're offending people, I'm like, good, because that's the guy that I'm following.
Yes.
So the books are.
Oh, did he ever? Yes.
And I love the way, because you talk about, and it is simple, but it's not easy. You talk about how you gave your life to God, and you're very sincere about that. You're like you said, you wake up every day. What can I do? That's giving your life to God. It's not saying the sinner's prayer. It's not, it's that stuff. It's what we actually do, right?
Jesus told us that there's no such thing as sin. But you have to understand, in order to read the Gospels, people have to understand that he could not speak against the prevailing religion at all because there was a death sentence if you did. So he couldn't say what he was really trying to say, what he had to say in order to complete his mission. He couldn't say those things. So he did it in really clever ways. People talk about his parables. He would tell a story and it had a deeper meaning, and then he would say, he who has ears to hear, let him hear.
Exactly.
Wink, wink, right?
Yeah.
And people would look for the deeper meaning. If he had something big to say, such as God doesn't judge you, well, you can't say that. But what you can do is frame it. And what he did was, one day he said, God doesn't judge you, but he has given all judgment to the Son, me. So all will honor the Son as they honor the Father. Okay, the temple guards let that go by because, somebody's still our judge, right? Then on a different day, same followers, different temple guards, he said, and as for me, I don't judge those who don't follow me because I didn't come to judge the world. I came to save the world. Now Christians go, he said save. Yeah, but not from God. He came to save the world from religions. That's all through the Gospels that's what he was doing. He was speaking against religions, but he couldn't say those words exactly. Right. he did say, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. He's inviting us to ask a question on a personal level. He told us that, don't pray in public, go into your inner room and talk to God in secret, and the God who sees in secret will hear you. That's the relationship he was trying to establish with God for us. Oh, by the way, he also obscurely said that you are your own afterlife judge. Because the third in that trilogy of statements about forgiveness, the third thing he said was, forgive and you'll be forgiven. And that's exactly what happens. We are the only judge after our deaths. And we are the toughest judge you can imagine, because we know what we meant to do and we know how we screwed up. So don't think it'll be easier. It's not, it's a lot harder. Have yourself be the judge. But knowing that is, you're forewarned and forearmed.
Yeah,
how to forgive.
Exactly. And one of the things I really love about your books, again, especially for people that are stuck in Christianity and they're looking for something else, but they still really love Jesus, because you said, I think everybody does. It's funny. I talked to atheists who love Jesus. I talked to the guy the other day who's a Hindu, and he's like, I love Jesus. Jesus is great. Everybody thinks Jesus is great. And your books really revere Jesus and really, put Jesus, I think where he should be, as our role model, as our big brother, as somebody that we can follow, not as someone who was here to save us from this angry God who, decided to send Jesus to die instead of us.
No, that's right. And I have been a Protestant. I have been a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I have studied, I studied religion in college, Christianity, basically. So I know from the religion, and I know from what it teaches. It's very comfortable and familiar to me. And I can tell you, Christians do not follow Jesus. Jesus was very specific in telling us that what did he say? If you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Mm-hmm. Exactly right. But they don't listen to his teachings at all. So he said, we are really his disciples, because we're so carefully trying to live the way Jesus wants us to live. And I revere, but they don't revere Jesus. I mean, I stopped going to Catholic Mass with my husband when one day, the beautiful new church, they built a new church, but it had over the altar a bigger than life-size plaster Jesus bleeding, nailed to a cross.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be in the room with that. I found I couldn't. It was so horrifying. But why did they do that? They do that because so you'll feel very guilty and always show up in church. It's a fear thing. It's a fear thing, everyone.
It is.
And fear is not love. You cannot love what you fear. So you have no idea what kind of a relationship you can have with Jesus when the fear is gone.
Yeah. And so many people don't realize that they're not following Jesus. They would push back on that and say, of course I'm following Jesus. I go to church every Sunday and they tell me to do this because I'm following Jesus. And they don't understand. Even our Bibles, unfortunately, have been corrupted. Things have been taken out, things have been put in. We have people still today that are scared to talk to mediums because they say their Bible tells them not to. They say, I can't believe in reincarnation because
it doesn't, though.
It does not. No. So say more about that.
Oh, it doesn't. There isn't. There in the Old Testament, there's a lot of consulting of oracles, mediums, and back then it was a lot of people didn't want people. Again, it's a control thing. If you're coming to my church every week and you go talk to a medium and the medium says, oh, your grandpa, and proves he's talking to grandpa, and your grandpa says, don't go to that church because it's not true. You're not going to go there anymore, and there's less money in the till. So of course they would tell you not to. But in 1 John 4:1, John says, try the spirits to see if they are of God, because many false spirits have gone out in the world. Everybody who was worth his salt or her salt as a medium always make sure that they're talking to people's dead relatives rather than to some demon going around in the world, because there are a lot of bad beings that are not embodied but have not fully transitioned.
Mhm.
But the Bible is not going to tell you to try the spirits if you're not supposed to be talking to the spirits, or is it? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't. And it's interesting that you were saying that, because one of the things we learn from people that speak to us from the afterlife, I haven't heard of a single instance where they said you need to go to this particular church. And in fact, they tell us there is no religion. Stop worrying
There's
about
no
stuff as much as
religion.
you do. Yeah. But
Yes,
the
yes.
churches need us there, and we go because of fear and guilt and tradition. And when we start to think for ourselves, we realize we don't need them anymore.
We'll get back to grief to growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best selling, easy to read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief, the number 2, growth.com, or text growth, growth, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
That's right. And the one of the problems with the Bible is that they treat the whole thing equally. Now, I've
Right.
read it, a million times.
Hmm.
You can't. The Old Testament is very distancing. Even the beautiful parts, you feel far from it. You hit Matthew, and suddenly you're in the presence of a 21st century man. It's an amazing difference to get to Jesus. Then you get past John and you get into Acts, and suddenly you're in the ancient past again.
Yeah.
Jesus is universal, and he is without time. He
Hmm.
is speaking to us as a modern man all the time. And when you mush it all together, which is what Christians do, and you allow Old Testament stuff and New Testament, and they say inspired word of God. Well, where that comes from? It comes from the fact that the counselors at the Council of Nicaea in
Yeah.
325 said, we're inspired by God.
Yeah.
That plus $1 might buy you half a sandwich. It's useless.
Yeah.
And Jesus tells us, actually, that you can go ahead and get a pair of scissors and go to work on your Bible.
Hmm.
He tells us, when someone asked him what was the greatest commandment, he didn't give any of the 10. He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind.
Hmm.
And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You hear that in churches all over the place. You don't hear the next line, though. The next line is, in that consists all the law and the prophets.
Hmm.
Now, the law and the prophets was what they called our entire Old Testament.
Right.
So if this sums up the Old Testament, then get your scissors out and cut away the Old Testament. Parts of the Old Testament I love,
Yeah.
but I'm telling you, it's not. God outmoded the Old Testament 2,000 years ago, basically. He said, love. That's all you have to do. Love and forgive. You have to forgive in order to love. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And everything that comes after Jesus, after John, in the Bible, is Paul's letters and some records of the early church. It's not God's word, because it's cultural. It's based in that culture. We are not part of that culture. It is not God's word.
Yeah.
There are parts of Paul, by the way, that were channeled, actually.
Hmm.
I mean, we all love 1 Corinthians 13.
Yeah.
It was written by Spirit. It wasn't written, and you can easily tell that. Just read what's before it and what's after it, and you can see there's suddenly God is speaking there.
Yeah.
There are parts of the Bible that were channeled that way, but to allow them to modify the sacred word of God on earth is just a travesty. But people do it. That's what they do in their churches.
And we were taught in church that the Bible is the perfect way. And people think of the Bible, it's those thin pieces of paper between the leather binder, right? And that's the way it was delivered. And they don't realize it was delivered over thousands of years through hundreds of authors Some of it inspired, some of it really not inspired, some of it poetry, some of it not meant to be taken literally. And what we really do is we destroy it when we take it literally. There's actually a lot of beauty in the Hebrew scriptures, or the Old Testament, as people call it. There's a lot of
I'm
beauty
not
there.
trying to speak against them.
No,
Yes,
you're
and there
not.
are people who are religious Jews, and more power to them. To tell you the truth, I love their religion, but it's not. It shouldn't be. It's different from the teachings of Jesus.
It is.
Jesus came to give us specific information and bring us to the next stage of human development. And it's been delayed for 2,000 years because it got turned into a religion that has nothing to do with anything he said. That's what's so strange. Why do people believe it when he didn't say any of it?
So let's talk about, because I know your books were channeled, and you say you can't. I've heard you say you can't really write, that your books are channeled, but there was something.
I can't write at all.
But there's something different about liberating Jesus. So tell us about the story of how that book came about.
Wow. Well, I have a guide that I've come to know very well. I didn't know him though until he had to come out in 2015 and tell me that I had been defying it. Now, just to give people basic information, we meet with our guides while our bodies sleep. Our minds don't need to sleep. So very often, on many nights, you're meeting with your guides and you're asking them questions. They're giving you direction. They're, maybe you and they're working on fixing your life plan. But a lot goes on at night while your body sleeps. And but what he was trying to do for apparently close to a year before he finally came out in February of 2015 and beat me over the head, he was trying to get me to write Liberating Jesus. And I was saying, no way, Jose, I'm not going to presume to do such a thing. I'm not worthy of that. And so one day, I got it into my mind, my mother probably wants to talk to me. It wasn't her, it was my guide. I made an appointment with a medium. I met with the medium, and I had a wonderful, actually, she's an excellent medium. I had a wonderful meeting with my family and my mother and my father. Everybody was there. It was just playtime. I thought, oh, this is great. Yeah. Then about 15, 20 minutes before the end of the hour, the medium said, oh, your guides are here. They want to talk to you. I said, bring them on. I was having so much fun. And so I met my guides. I actually had 11 at the time. It varies how many we have, depending on if I suddenly decide to play the piano, I'm going to get a piano guide for a while to help me get started. Anything you take it into your head to do that is positive, you'll get a guide for it. But I met those guides, and then she said, oh, and now your master guide steps forward. And he stepped forward, and he said, you may call me Thomas. And I knew who it was, and I was a groupie for about 2 years after this. It was Thomas Jefferson. I was totally unworthy of that, but I learned because he met with me a couple of times. I learned that actually we've had 17 lifetimes together. I've always been a man. We don't have anything like a male relationship at all. Instead, I've always been like his sidekick, his, the junior to him. And apparently I agreed with him right after he did one more incarnation after Jefferson. And apparently I agreed with him then to, if he wanted, because he had some things he wanted to finish during that lifetime. And I agreed I'd do it. I mean, what the heck? I'm used to who he was now, and I don't think of him that way at all. But it took me a long time. Yeah, I was very starstruck, as you can imagine, and he was frustrated by that. He doesn't at all identify as Thomas Jefferson now. He identifies as who he, is his eternal name. But that's why I wrote the book about how to solve our racial problems. That was his thing, and really? When he was here. Totally his thing. I mean, I got very fascinated by it and wish if I had another lifetime, I would be working on that full time, I tell you. But because it needs to be fixed. But anyway, when he was here, many people have heard of the Jefferson Bible. He was doing this kind of work himself, only he did it mainly in his old age. And he wrote his version of Liberating Jesus, apparently, but he didn't um, he felt it wasn't right for now. And he felt he couldn't have it published because of, he was famous for having done something else altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So I had agreed that I would do three things, apparently. I would help him because he chose that lifetime specifically so he could, end slavery. And I would work with him on finishing that. I would work with him on putting out the truth about Jesus, and I would try to help the country, which he thinks is in sorry shape right now, of course, because they're not following anything his generation did. So that's what I'm doing. But I didn't know for a while that was, really why I have had all the interests I've had.
Yeah.
But anyway, he told me I had to write Liberating Jesus. So I said, okay. He told me why. If we don't fix the world spiritually, raise its vibration fairly quickly within 200 years, he told me that the Christians will bring on Armageddon on their own to bring back Jesus. I thought that was crazy, but now I no longer think it's quite so crazy. No. But anyway, he's trying to prevent that. He's trying to raise our vibration rapidly enough. So anyway, I came in, this gets weirder. I came in with that as one of the things I was going to do, although I didn't know it at the time. Mm-hmm. And he was preparing me. That's why he had me doing all this research on the afterlife and stuff. And then I don't know if have you looked at A Course in Miracles? Have you studied it at all?
Yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That was channeled by a group that Jesus headed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He was unhappy that we were ignoring his gospels. And he thought if he gave us the same information, very advanced, we'd be more interested. Well, it turns out it was too advanced for us. You can't even do A Course in Miracles really well without a study group.
It's hard.
So he figured, okay, I aim too low. I'm paraphrasing what I was told Jesus decided. Mm-hmm. I aim too low the first time. I'm aiming too high the second time. We're going to do it just right. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to take the original gospels, which everybody knows are from me, mm-hmm. and we're just going to fix them because they have been distorted over the years. Mm-hmm. Just those gospels. No other gospels, many of which are real, nothing else. Mm-hmm. And that's what Liberating Jesus is. Yeah. And so Thomas told me, okay, we're going to start writing the book. And I said, yay. And so we started writing the book, and we wrote it just the way we always do it. He gives me the table of contents, which never varies after he's given it to me. And we started writing, and we got through the first part of the book, and I was flowing. I was really having fun, and I thought it was going to be great. Mm-hmm. Then I got a call from my a friend, the medium, who had originally, helped me get in contact with Thomas. And he said, mm-hmm. Thomas just seized me in a Walmart parking lot and actually became part of my body. He basically occupied her briefly. And mm-hmm. he told me this. He said, we want to warn you that you are about to work with the master directly. And what was the rest of it? Please let us know if it overwhelms the physical. We have reduced his energies substantially, but we want to make sure that you're okay. Mm-hmm. Something like that. Mm-hmm. I said, what does that mean? She said, who the hell knows? We don't know. So I woke up at 2 the next morning, and for 2 weeks, I had a very different presence in my mind all the time. Mm-hmm. If anyone tells you Jesus is a wimp, he's wrong.
Mm, yeah.
And he just had me, he used me like a word processor. Thomas, I feel like I'm really doing it. He's just making me feel smart. But literally, my fingers were moving so fast, I didn't know what I had written until after the 2 weeks were over.
Wow.
I mean,
wow.
I a little, and if he thought a word was wrong, he would make me look at that spot. And I would look at it. No, it's fine to me. Go back. Oh, make me look at it. And eventually I'd say, oh, I know what this is what he wants. As soon as I made the change, we'd go on. I was a word processor for 2 weeks.
Wow. Yeah, that's really fast.
Wow. Brian, I was thinking while it was going on, I really should pay attention to this experience because it's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. But you don't at the time. You're too immersed in it to really step back and look at it.
Yeah.
And then I started hearing his thoughts in my mind. And he really is very disgusted with the way Christianity is treating him. He is.
I would imagine. Yeah, I would imagine. It's interesting as you talk about Thomas Jefferson, because I have a connection to Thomas Jefferson.
Oh,
Um,
you really?
yeah, I'm part of the Hemings family. So if you know the Sally Hemings, story. Um,
He was not her lover, believe it or not. It was Randolph.
oh, okay. So yeah, it's really interesting. And when I hear you talking about, you can take your Bible and cut it up with scissors, that's literally what Thomas Jefferson did. So people might not know
Yes, he did.
when you made the reference to the Jefferson Bible, he says, he separated the diamonds from the dung, is the way he put it. It's like, there's
He said the
so
words of Jesus stick out in the Bible like diamonds in a dunghill. And he was a farmer. He would know from dunghills.
yeah. Yeah, so it's that connection, and I got to say I've read all your books, and the Liberating Jesus is just a fantastic book, and I recommend to people who are in Christianity who really want to get to know Jesus better and really want to feel to explore, to do that. And you talked about A Course in Miracles. I interviewed Robert Perry, who's I think probably the foremost expert on the Course in Miracles, and one of the things when we were talking, there's so many parallels to the near-death experience in the course. I realized I knew most of the stuff in there because I've been studying near-death experiences, and I know you've studied them a lot too.
Yes. Near-death experiences are extraordinary, spiritually transformative experiences, but
Okay.
everybody knew that they were not death. In fact, Raymond Moody, who has been on Seek Reality, said, of course they don't have anything to do with death. That's why I called them near death. You don't die in a near-death experience. But people recently have forgotten that because they are so extraordinary. But a near-death experience is a usually trauma-induced ejection from the body. So you're doing astral travel, and they often all those experiences happen in the astral plane, which is gigantic. It's like much bigger than the universe. But they don't happen where the dead go. And one of the ways there are many, well, the dead tell us they don't happen where the dead go. They
Interesting.
also are very atypical. They're always tailored to the person who's having them more than they
Right.
are tailored to what actually happens at death. But all of that being said, I think they're wonderful experiences for the people who have them. And when they share the experience, if it's positive, there's a lot of negative stuff that happens in near-death experiences. And when people, I mean, you can find on the internet, on YouTube, people who say, oh, if you don't do this, you don't do that, you're going to hell. I was told that in my near-death experience. There's no such thing. It doesn't happen. So that's why I tell people, don't think it's real what's happening in a near-death experience. Think of it as a wonderful communication from the guides of the person who had the experience. And then you can really learn a lot from near-death experiences.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I've always kind of thought of it as maybe they were going to like a halfway point or something. And that might be another way of putting it.
Point.
Yeah, it's kind of a halfway point. It's an astral plane, because usually not usually, but a lot of times in near-death experiences, they'll experience some sort of a barrier, like a river or a wall.
Excellent point.
Yes.
Yeah,
There's some sort of barrier that they can't cross. So it is, my impression has always been, and it's highly tailored. I believe it is. It's kind of like, I think it's kind of a wake up call. It's for a lot of people. It's like, we want to get you back on track. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But knowing that they don't happen where the dead go makes it much easier for people to understand what actually happens at death, which is really pretty consistent across cultures and across, among people inside a culture. It's very, very consistent. And it doesn't involve, we never see God. There is no such thing as a physical God. We are loved and nurtured and cared for and supported the whole time, because when you first leave your body at death, you are about as clueless as you were when you first left your mother's body. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So your loved ones come for you and they help you, to get ready and go and get you out of there as soon as possible. Because one thing that can happen is that you can get stuck. You have raised your personal energy vibration substantially after leaving your body, but then there's your mother crying at your bedside, or somebody you really love, and you want to make them know you're okay. Look at me, I couldn't be better. And if you do that, you will lower your vibration and be unable to see the people who came to rescue you. So a lot of ghosts are made that way, and you can prevent being a ghost by getting the heck out of there immediately. because once you are fully transitioned and acclimated, you can give your mother all kinds of signs that you're fine. You just can't, they can't see you when you just have gotten out of your body.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Thank you. That's a really interesting perspective. So I wanted to talk to you about your racial reconciliation work, and one of the things I was going to ask you is how did you get into that? But I guess it was kind of this Thomas Jefferson. So
Thomas,
you said he had an in-between life. Was he an abolitionist in that in-between life, or?
nope.
Okay.
He said that he was. I know this is hard to believe. He was very disappointed at first in his Jefferson lifetime. He said, "I had too much power. I didn't always use it well." He was in his early adulthood an ardent abolitionist, and that changed. And do you know what changed it?
I don't.
You wouldn't, because it was the death of his wife. His wife was the daughter of someone who imported slaves. Her treasured stepmother was his mistress, who had 6 half siblings for her. And Patty he destroyed everything that Patty wrote. He destroyed all their letters. He destroyed everything. To find Patty, you have to look at the changes her death brought, and what he wrote before her death and what he wrote after her death. And what he wrote before her death was driven by the notion that this is something he cannot even bear to be around. The whole notion that people are owned this way. And it was illegal for most of his life to free slaves in Virginia, but nevertheless, what he tried to do was give them the best life that he could. And it's strange now to think of it, but he wouldn't allow them ever to be hit or beaten in any way. He gave them Saturdays and Sundays off, and they worked Saturdays only in the peak season. They all had, homes, real homes that were theirs, and they had a garden that went with it. And they grew vegetables, and they grew chickens, and they grew eggs. And he didn't grow those things. So there exists at Monticello an account book. In that account, he kept careful records of which of his servants had sold their produce to the main house. And he always owed them money, but he did pay them back. So that's very different from, it's crappy, but it's a different level of crappy. Yeah. And he gradually came to see that, in order to make this happen, he was going to have to change the people around him who were so invested in this system. And he started out to do that. I believe Patty died in 1782. I believe if she had lived, he would not have become president. He instead would have completed an abolition long before the Civil War. I believe that because that's how strongly he felt about it.
Interesting.
And that's how strongly he still feels now. I mean, look what he made me do. Yeah. I had to do all this research, but he's right. He's absolutely right. Do you know what the reason is we still have racial problems?
What is it?
We never emancipated the slaves. Never. We think all that was necessary was and this is directly from Thomas, we think all that was necessary was to abolish slavery. And we did that, of course. But there's a period below the age of 6 when we are learning our position in life. We're learning a lot of things. We learn water's hot or cold. We learn, and we learn what our position is, what our rank is in life. And so slaves who were born and were brought up in slave cabins learned that that's their status. Sure. And you can't later in life just say, okay, go free, because they still have that in their heads. Yeah. And one by one, gradually, over the generations, so many descendants of slavery have freed themselves. But they shouldn't have had to do that. It should have been something done for them during the quote restoration period. But instead, what they did was just start a second stage of slavery, right? We all know it as the Jim Crow period. If you study it as I have, it breaks your heart. It was slavery without an owner. That's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, it was completely slavery. People could go north. They were treated better in the north.
Somewhat.
But that's a big thing. Even if you're free to go, it's very, because remember, they were still in the mindset of being slaves, inferior, whatever.
Yeah. It's really interesting having this conversation. I've developed a workshop called Overcoming Racism that I've been teaching. It's about 3 hours long. And it goes over a lot of the points you're talking about. And I think you made a really, really important point that if we treat people differently, especially in those formative years, it develops a mindset. And then all of our personalities are pretty much formed by the time we're 6 years old. So that develops a mindset that makes it very, very difficult to break out of. And to this day, we are 200 plus years after slavery, 150 years after slavery, but we still have never made up for that time. And people that are African
We're
Americans.
in the third stage now. We are right now in the third stage of American slavery.
Okay. So tell me more about that.
And this was deliberate, I'm confident. President Johnson was not a model abolitionist. I think maybe I can say that. He was a Texan, and he was in his youth rabidly racist.
Yes.
And what he decided to do, because the greatest American of the 20th century was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was an implacable force. They couldn't prevent what he was going to do, because there was, I remember the day he died. You're too young to remember it, but let me tell you, he was the greatest American of the 20th century. So in order to because there was no way to keep them from ending the Jim Crow restrictions, instead they decided that they would tell the fathers and husbands who had remember now, they brought their families through slavery, they brought their families through Jim Crow, and the percentage of intact Black and white families was almost the same, right up until the War on Poverty. Because what the War on Poverty did was to say, and I know what they thought they were saying. I'm not saying they're all evil people, but some of them were quite evil.
Yeah.
They said to these men who had all their lives been kept down and still had taken care of their families and their wives and children, said to them, if you don't go away, we are going to make sure your family doesn't do well. But if you go away, we'll take care of your family for you. That's a deal they all took. And they would not. Free men would die. They would fight to the death before they got driven out of their own families, especially after all they'd been through. But these men were slaves still in their minds.
Yeah, and interesting perspective.
So now if you look around, the Black family is all broken up, and yet there are, culturally, in their history, there are no people more family oriented than the people who came through slavery and Jim Crow. That's what they had. That's what they have. And yet the kids grow up without a father.
Yeah.
You know that after they're weaned, children actually often need a father more than they need a mother.
I didn't
know that. I read a study that said that.
Yeah, I know that fatherhood is very, very important. And it does concern me also the fact that so many, and there's a cycle that goes on with people growing up without fathers in the home, which leads to, more crime, which leads to them going to prison, which leads to their children growing up without fathers in the home.
I have studied it. I have studied the whole thing, the school to prison pipeline. It literally all traces back to the War on Poverty.
Yeah.
And then to Nixon. Nixon was fighting both the anti-war people and the civil rights movement. So the way he did it was by trying to criminalize as many Black men as possible.
Yes.
That's when it started.
Right.
And right now, they are not talking at all about what they should talk about with regard to Black men and prison. It is a tragedy. There are prisons with 3 generations of Black men there forever.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're criminal. They're not. It's not that they're any different. You know that people with my shade of skin are actually East Africans? Do you know that?
I did not know that. No. Yeah. Yep.
East Africans went north, 50, 100,000 years ago, but there was an ice sheet covering Europe. So they sort of had to cool their jets there for a while. One person, East African, had a genetic mutation so that his brown eyes were blue.
Mhm.
First guy with blue eyes, one guy. But everyone back 50, 100,000 years ago thought that was really sexy. So blue eyes spread rapidly in this population. The average European, because after, I think about 10,000 years ago, it was pretty easy to get into Europe. So that's when they mainly populated Europe, but what they were was East Africans with dark skin, and many of them had blue eyes. They're finding skeletons now and able to sequence the genetic material. Amazing. That's what they come up with over and over again.
Yeah.
But what happened was about 3000 BC, roughly, there were horsemen who came in from the Ukrainian steppe, and those horsemen had brought two mutations that allowed for people to get rid of the melanin in their skin. And of course, that far north they needed to make vitamin D.
Right.
So that became a very successful mutation. And within, 1,000, 1,500 years, the Europeans had lost the melanin in their skin. But they are still East Africans. There hasn't been enough time that's passed.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because
we're cousins. I mean, for Pete's sake,
we're all the same race. There's one race.
Exactly. Well, not only are we the same race, it's even closer than that.
Yeah, the whole idea
is so stupid.
The whole idea of race came about, and it really, the whole white-black thing came about in America in the late 1600s, when they had to find a reason why we're going to enslave these people. So we have to make them less than being human.
That's right.
It's interesting, Roberta, because people are probably wondering, well, how does this tie back into the whole afterlife thing and spirituality? It's really fascinating to me how we seem to continue these threads in reincarnation. Thomas Jefferson and you living these multiple lives together, him coming back and saying, okay, I didn't do this so well in my last lifetime, so let me come back and do it this way. And now I'm going to tap Roberta to carry on this work in 2020. So we're a whole lot more connected, and we're a lot more important, I guess, in history than we think we are.
It is quite amazing. So do you want to know how you fix the whole racial problem in one generation?
I do, yes.
Education. What you do is everyone and I think it should just be for the descendants of slavery, between you and me, everyone who has at least one ancestor that was ever held here in slavery, our reparations are this. At birth, each of those children is a star child. We are going to teach that child from birth that he is unusual, exciting, special, important, beloved. We'll make sure that his mother knows how to help him learn things. And we know from experiments that, of course, the mothers want to help. They just often don't know how to help. But we raise those children as if they're princes and princesses. And we give them an extraordinary education, bar none. If we do that with one generation, we'll never have another problem racially.
Oh, I love that idea. Yeah, I love that idea. I think that's excellent. It's simple, but it's brilliant, because we talked about reparations, and we stumble all over it. We're going to pay money. Yeah, we're going to pay people money.
Let's use the money to fix the problem, and that's what it would do. That's what it would do.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. Wow, I've never heard anybody say that before. I know you and I touched on it once in a conversation, but the more I think about that, the more I think it would really change things, because what people don't understand is how deep the scars go, and they're generational, and people
that's right
have a really difficult time understanding what it's like to be that an outsider in your own country. So we're coming up on over an hour, so I want to respect your time and the listeners' time. I could talk to you all day long, but
we have fun, don't we?
I do want to encourage people to read the books, the fun books about dying and growing together, and also your book about racial reconciliation, because I think that's another really important thing, and it all ties together. And again, for Christians or for non-Christians, read Liberating Jesus, because Jesus is an amazing spirit that I think we're all kind of naturally attracted to. I mean, like I said, I've never talked to anybody that says, I don't like Jesus, ever.
No, it's all wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah. So any final things you want to say to wrap up our time together today?
No, I just want to admire you so much. You're doing such wonderful work. I'm sure Shayna is thrilled with with the work you're doing, and spreading this love and hope and joy to people and helping them understand that there really is no death. So I just want to give you kudos for all the work you're doing.
Well, it comes full circle. As I said at the beginning, I want to wrap up with this. I started listening to your podcast. I wrote to you, Roberta. I know you're a lot busier. Well, you were busy then too, but you wrote back right away, and you and I started kind of an exchange. You put me in contact with an amazing medium who gave me one of the best readings I've ever had. And it just, I feel like, we put each other on these paths, and, we're probably part of the same soul team.
I would love that.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Maybe it's true. Yeah,
Well,
I even had you blog on my blog, and we
yes.
don't ever allow guest bloggers, but I thought your story was one people needed to hear.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So it's been really great catching up with you today. I'm really glad to put this out into the world. I want to tell everybody to find your podcast, Seek Reality. You can find Roberta at robertagrimes.com. It's Roberta, GRIMES.com, and get the books.
It's lovely. It's lovely to spend this time with you. Thank you, everybody, for watching us.
Thanks, Roberta. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
That's it for another episode of Grief to Growth. I sure hope you got something out of it. Please stay in contact with me by reaching out at www.grieftogrowth.com. That's grief, the number 2, growth.com. Or you can text the word growth to 31996. That's simply text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. Since you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. So hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell here, and it'll notify you when I have new content. Always, please share the information if you enjoy it. That helps me to get more views and to get the message out to more people. Thanks a lot, and have a wonderful day.